Under the umbrella of economic security, what would you expect some of the main topics at hand to be in this meeting between Janet Yellen and her Chinese counterpart?
I think it's more the significance that the meeting is happening at all, Katie, given where we were only a few months ago when communications were very minimal. Now the top two economic officials are getting together. The press releases say they're going to talk about areas where they can cooperate on the economy. So that could be climate change, for example, or look for cooperation on debt distress. That's the idea of helping poorer or emerging economies pay back the debt that they've borrowed during the pandemic and so on. So those are areas where there could be cooperation. But I don't think there's going to be any particular game changer per se when it comes to what they both can deliver. I mean, Ms. Yellen talks about it's not about decoupling, it's about de-risking. It's about this idea that the US will protect national security but will continue to do business with China. But of course, China doesn't really buy that argument. They push back that the US is trying to cut China off from the rest of the world, so to speak, and to contain its economic rise. So it's more, the significance is more to the fact that the meeting is happening at all rather than the outcomes, I think.
That is certainly significant, and of course the lead up to the face-to-face between Xi and Biden. But I mean, you mentioned this idea of the Chinese maybe being a little reticent about the U.S.'s ambitions and what they say to cut them off here. But Yellen has been pretty explicit that she wants to actually see some of those barriers come down, meaning for U.S. businesses having fair access, I should say, to the Chinese market.
Yeah, absolutely. Market access, protection of IP, protection of technologies, areas of national security. All of these points, Ms. Yellen has proven to be just as hawkish as others on. But she's trying to weave this line that the two economies can also continue to do business together. China, of course, pushes back on this idea. They are, though, given the slowdown in China's economy, given the real estate bust, and given the kind of negative sentiment on foreign investment in China, there is a view that China is kind of back on the market for some investment again. And that's partly why they do want to try and stabilise relations with the US as well, that it's also in their interest. They want to get better mood music, better optics, and try and get some global companies coming back into China. So there's a little bit of give and take on both sides here, but I would emphasise that it's relative to where we were. It's a big step forward, but in real terms, I think it's going to be fairly granular progress in terms of what does come out of these meetings.
Yeah, and just speaking to that granularity, when we do get to the big meeting between the two heads of states, I know that typically they're not the ones that get into that granularity here, but do you think just the optics of them meeting once again face-to-face could actually maybe further things along?
Yep. So, I mean, there's two ways of reading it. You can say last year Presidents Biden and Xi met in Biden. That was meant to be the great reset. China-US relations back on track, or at least back on an even keel, say. But of course, that was all shot down with the balloon only a few months later. And I think this time around again, the story is one of and this time around, the story is one of just, again, stabilization. The two leaders getting together in the room is clearly, progress in itself. But in terms of what kind of actual deliverables will come out of it, I think expectations are being managed on both sides. The best they can do is get the channels of communication open again, military to military, treasury to treasury, get those lines open, working again, and perhaps look for some areas where they can cooperate. But of course, we all know with the US presidential election next year, the US-China story hasn't gone away.
Yeah, the balloon was back in February, Romaine. It feels like an actual lifetime ago.
I know. Is it still up there?
I don't know.
I mean, we shot it down or something, right?
Something like that.
Or we just let it drift back to China?
No, I
forgot all about the balloon.
I think it was shot down, but
there's just so much going on between the U.S. and China. It's hard to keep up.
There is a lot going on, and Enda, we're talking about balloons, but let's also talk about chips because, like you said, maybe not many deliverables coming from this meeting, these series of meetings. But when you think about one of the big issues, one of the big topics of conversation, it really feels like the semiconductor industry is where a lot of these tensions are playing out.
Yeah, the US continues to enforce export controls and other investment restrictions in what they consider to be sensitive areas of technology, semiconductors being the obvious one, but also AI and quantum computing are other areas. There's bipartisan support for that. China, of course, wants those restrictions lifted. They say you're just trying to tamp down our economic rise. There's no hint of a pullback by the US on that front. Broadly speaking, on trade policy, the Biden administration has been pretty hawkish, so no sign of a turn there.